It's our great pleasure to welcome to our 2022 Online Trend Summit, Ira van Eelen. Ira joins us today as co-founder of RESPECTfarms, a cellular agriculture Nederland board member, a founder of KindEarth.Tech, food tech board member, and a Next Nature fellow. Ira, wow, that's quite an introduction. And if that, of course, weren't enough, cellular agriculture is very much in your blood. Your father, Willem van Eelen, was a pioneer in this area and began working on this technology back in the 1980s. So thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to welcome you to our virtual stage.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, and thank you very, very much, Charles, for inviting me to talk about a topic that is close to my heart and is, as we say, a sort of family business around us.
No, absolutely. I mean, from all of the evidence that we hear and see, our food system is no longer fit for purpose, particularly when you look at impact on environments, communities, animals, and human health. So with that in mind, we invite you to join us today to explore some of the latest developments in cellular agriculture technology, and how, with some of your work and the other organizations that you're collaborating with, how you're bridging that gap between scientists and the theory and the farmers, and also the role that cellular agriculture can play in our future demand for protein. Well, we had Brian join us from New Age Meats last year, which was fantastic, and it was a brilliant presentation. The audience had lots of questions. How do we transition from where we are now? How and when does it become scalable? And how, in your experience, how have we seen consumers respond? Obviously, there's a big question around regulatory approval. Where after Singapore, goes first? Is it a direct shift, from one to the other, or do we see more of a transition? And of course, we have an existing agriculture system. So, are there elements of what we do now that we can take into a new future? And of course, there's lots has changed in recent months. Really exciting, some of the developments happening locally to you, so really excited to hear about that. Just before we jump in, and I can't wait to get started, just a note to participants: if you're joining today as a Trend Hub subscriber, you can discover much more about the topics covered in this discussion in our 23-24 food, drink and cuisines and ingredients trends framework on Trend Hub. So all of that said, I'll stop talking so much, and we'll dive in. And look, just from your introduction, you're involved in cellular agriculture in many ways. Can you just give us a brief introduction to the different organizations that I introduced a few moments ago?
Well, I'm obviously Dutch, so I don't speak your brilliant English, but yes, my father started working on this in 1980. So when I was a teenager, somehow, sort of at my father's place, I got introduced to him and a couple of friends doing the math that at the time they figured out if all the Chinese and all of Asia and Africa would eat as much meat and dairy and eggs as we were eating at the time already, and that was 1980, we wouldn't need 4 planets and we wouldn't have any polar caps. So since I was 14, I was well aware of the problem that somehow our food system was causing us. And shortly after that, my father had thought he found the silver bullet, started working on it, and I've had long discussions about it ever since. He wrote the first patents in the 90s. He got the first ever grant in the Netherlands. And so the Netherlands did the first ever grant on research to make cells into meat. And why do I start with this story is that when it became possible in the Netherlands to go after a huge grant at a certain fund that was made in the Netherlands to work towards a better future for the Netherlands, I jumped on it, and I was really excited to find an amazing group that was willing to work together on a plan to forward the Netherlands into the world of cellular agriculture. And we managed to work hard and get a huge grant of 60 million to work on cellular agriculture. Not only cultivated meat, also precision fermentation.
Yeah.
And that is one of the things that is right now a really hot topic, because only sort of 2 or 3 weeks ago, we got the final good news that we did get this money, that we can start working on education in the public. So it's all public money going to public research, public scale up, and public R&D, which is important because we don't want this very unique industry that has a huge potential to do good for animals, for health, for transparency, for climate, also for good taste, to be in the not only behind closed doors of IP, not only be in the hands of a couple of big companies. I don't think if we talk about food, we sort of want this to be only for a couple of companies. We need diversity.
Yeah.
And I think we will be able to do a lot with this money. Probably not enough. So the Cellular Agriculture Netherlands Society also will work on further expansion of creating an ecosystem that is fitting for this new industry. So what do you need from beginning to end? So from the first cell that you need to actually getting it into a supermarket, there's a whole value chain. And that is what Cellular Agriculture Netherlands wants to work on.
Yeah.
The other thing you mentioned, that I am part of KindEarth.Tech. That's just 2 girls having fun. The other girl being Olivia Fox-Cabaan. We are both headstrong, slightly weird, and we went to a lot of conferences that we didn't like, and we hated the idea that you could be on stage if you just paid enough. And so we created KindEarth.Tech because we wanted to create the most impossible business model. You can't pay your way on stage. We ask you to come on stage. We want you to be on stage, whether you are a high-end person or just a startup that started yesterday. Because if your content is rich, if it's kind tech, we want to hear from you. And then your talk is as good as anybody's talk.
Yeah.
Impossible business model. We will never get rich of it, but we are having a lot of fun, and we are very proud that we highlight the right kind of people. We highlight new initiatives. We do it in San Francisco, in Amsterdam, and in Singapore. We've done now, I think, 5 versions, even in COVID times, a digital one, which I thought I would never do, but I had a lot of fun. So I understand what you're doing here. That's it can work if you do it well. And I think you guys are doing it very well. So that's KindEarth.Tech, and most people know us because we make these amazing industry maps. So where at this moment more than 1,100 companies, investors, whether they're from cultivated meat or plant-based or precision fermentation or solar protein, all alternative protein, a better way to produce food, tasty food, nice food, they're on our maps. And it's free. And it's for everybody to use. Just say that we make the maps and we're happy that you are using them. So go to the KindEarth.Tech website, go to the food maps, and you have a complete overview of what's going on.
Yeah, and
so
they're fantastic, actually. I've used them myself. They're a fantastic resource.
Yeah. And all the honor in this aspect goes to Olivia Fox-Cabaan, who's crazy enough to make them. And that's so wonderful about her. Then, of course, there's RESPECTfarms. And why did I start RESPECTfarms? Most people know my father from a very famous picture. You see him taking off his hat to a cow in the field.
Yeah.
That was not a marketing picture. That was just my father having a good conversation with a farmer who was really angry. How on earth did Mr. van Eelen think that anyone would ever eat anything other than the amazing meat he was making on his farm? And my father was also heavily attacked by vegans and vegetarians, and my father was at the time already quite old. So he asked me to drive him to the farmer, and I remember asking him in the car, okay, why are we now going to the farmer? and we're not going to these vegans or vegetarians. And it was a little bit in jest because I knew his answer, but his honest answer was, vegans and vegetarians aren't the problems. We need farmers to do the work with cultivated meat.
Yeah.
They're food producers. They know how to go about animals. We will still need animals. It's not to do away with them. So I need to go to this guy and explain to him that a part of his barn can be reshaped in such a way that he can also make the same kind of nutritional value of his pigs in a completely different way. And maybe not tomorrow, maybe not the day after tomorrow, but I don't want him to think it's not for him.
Yeah.
So that's when we went there. And what I found shortly after my father had passed away, and I was brought back to the cultivated meat sphere by Josh Tetrick, whom we probably know from Just Eat and from Good Meat, I noticed that the whole idea of farmers being part of cultivated meat was nowhere to be found.
No.
And that surprised me. And I started talking about that first grant. The outcome of that first grant in 2008 was how farmers could do cultivated meat on their farms, feeding the cells with biomass from algae.
You talked a little bit about how your life has taken you into cellular agriculture, clearly through the work of your father. But what for you, I guess, as an individual, what's the reason that you kind of pursue what you do, and what do you see as the urgency? What why do we need to do this for you?
Oh, well, this is a hard one. For me, the sheer fact that you can make the same product without having to use an animal or abuse an animal or take away the full potential of an animal would be already enough to go full into cultivated meat.
Yeah.
In the years that I've learned more about cultivated meat, it has also been something that can help prevent the horrors of climate change, because it doesn't need as much land. It doesn't need as much water. There's no antibiotic used in it. And the feed conversion of feeding a cell is nearly 100%, whereas in animals, 50 to 38% is what we do. So to me, a complete no-brainer.
Yeah.
I think that this way of making meat, and let's not forget, meat is a high-end protein that people do very well on.
Yeah.
It is something we love to eat because we love the taste of meat, and it's very specific. It's not easy to mimic it in any other way than with cultivated meat. The urgency is also simple. All of these animals have so much methane coming out of them, and we can't handle that. So that's the other urgency. So there's this dual urgency. I want to make sure that we keep on living on this planet in the best way possible. And I hope that we are the best possible humanity to be living on this planet. Because if we don't do better, then maybe Mother Nature is really doing a good job by making it too hard for us to handle.
I mean, there's a lot talked about around cellular agriculture, but it feels like there is also a lot that isn't said. And I wonder if you can just help us to kind of debunk cellular agriculture. Can you sort of bring the process principles to life for us? What kind of talk us through that broad process from animal through to packaged foods?
I am going to keep it really simple. I'm not going to portray myself here as a scientist. I do know about the science. I know about the difference between the sciences that is going on around cultivated meat, because there's not just one way right now being used to make this new meat. But the basic principle is that you take a small sample of an animal, you call it a biopsy. It's not much bigger than a sesame seed or a peppercorn. Within that tissue, you will find stem cells from the tissue you want to make, because you can decide to make fat, or you can decide to make muscle. You can even decide to make skin, let's say chicken skin, which is very tasty. And you give that cell, which is minute, it's microscopic, small, but you give it the nutrients it needs, and you do that at the right temperature. And the other thing, which is very, very important for cells, if they start to grow, or you put in a couple of cells, they need to be in proximity of each other. It's called high density. So they only will divide, feel comfortable, feel happy to do so, if they have the right temperature, the right nutrients, and the right proximity. And then they start dividing. And in the beginning, it's still very small, but it does divide completely. Every, let's say, so many minutes, there's a division, and there's another division. And it goes way faster than, for instance, the growing of the cells in an animal. So the amount of meat you will get out of an animal will be much faster in this process. You put those cells in a bioreactor, because a bioreactor is what is the sort of mimicking this temperature. It holds the nutrition, and it gives them enough room to expand. It is actually giving the cell what it wants. And if you make a cell happy by giving him nutrients and the right temperature, funny thing is, it starts to divide, and we call it growth. And at a certain point, it is through all of its divisions, and then it's not slaughter time, but it's harvest time. And then what comes out depends on the tech being used by the different companies. And that can either be with scaffolds, so you have certain texture already. It can be that the cells coagulate and become muscle fibers, and that does give a certain a bite to it. Then some tech right now can even co-culture fat and muscle cells together, but it is very different. Every company, what they're working on, they have these, they have their choices made. There's not just one thing coming out of that bioreactor. Even the bioreactor, which we usually make to look as a sort of cylinder or a tank, we don't even know whether that will be the shape, or whether it will be flat, or whether it will be perfusion. What we do know, and I want to stress this, all of this research and all of this tech came out of a medical field. In medical field, scaling up price and whatever you use to get to the end is not important. The big shift in this new technique has been to work with people who have been used to using these techniques for medical reasons, to looking at it with completely different sets of wishes in a food space. So suddenly, what you feed those cells, it needs to be cheap. And those bioreactors don't need to have pharma grade, but they have to be food grade. They don't exist. Something that was very and is still commonly used in the medical field, the serum, and I know you want to ask this question, is that still used? No, it's not. In the production of cultivated meat, especially in larger scale than currently is possible, it is completely ridiculous to think that we would ever use that very expensive and very not kind stuff. Nobody wants that. And a company in the Netherlands, for instance, Motameat, they have put online, because they wanted to get out of this whole discussion, their complete recipe for a plant-based base media, and that every company can actually work on or tweak to make their perfect media. And there are no animal compounds in it. It's completely plant-based. At a certain point, you harvest those cells, and depending on what tech you use, you will be able to either make a sausage or a steak, or you actually will have a small steak, like RESPECTfarms is already making. So what will be at the supermarket and how it will be packaged, I hope very clearly, cultivated meat with a lot of explanation on where it comes from and the safety assessments on it. But yeah, that's how it works.
So one of the things I wanted to ask about is the not only what kind of goes on inside the bioreactor, but what goes in, what comes out, how long does it take? And I guess some of the answer to that is it depends which technology you're using to what outcome you're looking for.
Yeah, let's make it very clear. Price parity is an important thing. So everybody will try to get the highest yield out of their cells, out of the machine they have to buy, out of the food they are giving those cells. That is right now the holy grail. How cheap can I make it? The assessments done on this, and it's not being proven yet, but the assessments done of it is that it is possible with cultivated meat to actually end up at a lower price than conventional meat, because it's such a very, very efficient way of growing these meat cells.
Yeah. Okay. Now that's really helped us, I think, kind of understand what that can look like, because the audience that we're talking to today are very familiar with large containers, large bins of ground meat or that kind of thing that is then formed into meatballs or burger patties, or whether that's a whole piece of protein that's cut. So I just wanted to draw some analogies for the audience really about what's happening and what does that look and kind of feel like.
Well, for them, I think they should see it as a new form of protein with all kinds of benefits that they will be able to use in whatever way they like, and that they will be able to use from beef, from pork, from chicken, but also from fish and shrimp and lobster.
Yeah.
And what most people in the meat industry do really understand, with cultivated meat, every cell and every part of the yield you get is as good as the other part. You don't have cheap meat or expensive meat anymore. So everything that comes out of that bioreactor is exactly what you want it to be, whether that is lobster or whether that is caviar or whether that is foie gras. And that's exciting. And that will shift certain things. And I think a lot in the meat industry already have thoughts about this, but for the general public, this will be news.
Absolutely. I guess and as somebody is a processor and someone who adds value to meat currently, what you're talking about is an alternative raw material and an alternative input into existing processes to create the foods that we love and enjoy.
Yeah, and I also hope that everybody understands that one of the cool things is that with the current knowledge we have about plant-based products and what kind of taste we can already make with that, and all the textures we can make with it, most of these products also will be hybrids, and maybe even tribreds, because let's see, when we still use milk with precision fermentation, for instance, you will be able to make real casein, real cheese, real milk. So it's very exciting that all of these raw materials coming your way will be safe, traceable, transparent, using no antibiotics at all, can actually almost be organic if you choose to use a certain methods, and that will be your starter material, and it will be the same every time again. It's very consistent.
Yeah. What then, and you touched on a couple of elements that have sort of sparked this question, what then is your and I say your kind of collective vision for a future food system? Do you see a world where animals then don't graze the land? Is there a future for agriculture as we know it even?
Yeah, I think so. I am quite impressed how agriculture has reinvented itself the last 40 to 50 years. Let's not say ever that this is a backward industry, whereas they have opted and improved immensely. So I, for instance, would think it completely ridiculous if we would not use their know-how, their knowledge, their entrepreneurial spirit as part of this new industry. And as you probably know, also with the research done, it was always meant to be something to sort of add on to the farm as well. So in my future around novel foods at large, there will be, and I've even done research on this with the European Union, and they predict that in 2040 we will have cell farmers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Food producers that work with cells. We also have farmers that also brew beer. We also have farmers that also make yogurt or cheese. Why not also have bioreactors making cells from their own chicken or beef or pigs? So I noticed that there wasn't a lot of attention to this route. A lot of investors came in. Investors wanted to make price parity happen. Price parity could only happen with large-scale facilities. So that was where all the attention went. And I must admit, since 2017, I've been raising the question like, okay, and who's working with the farmers? Not a lot of people were stepping up. So I said, okay, I'll take my father's head. I start talking about this. I start working with farmers at first, did research, and thought, my God, it is so hard to make people understand what it would look like if a farmer would actually do cultivated meat on his farm, that I asked my government and the Ministry of Agriculture, can you help me make a film so that I don't have to talk so much and that the film can do its work, and that you can also use it for research to have conversations with stakeholders, mainly also farmers. And we've already done that, and it's super exciting. And I've brought the film, so if I'm allowed to show it,
absolutely,
I would love that.
Let's roll the Respect Farms film.
Isn't it a wonderful sight? My cows frolicking in the meadow. This makes me so happy. For 87 years, this farm has been run by my family. From my great-grandparents William and Agatha, to my grandparents Harry and Anne, to my mom and dad. They would be so proud to see that the farm is still being family-owned. I've managed the company for the last 15 years. Not everything has gone smoothly. There were several bumps in the road, and I frequently had to adapt our business model. But every time I go to work, I feel sheer joy. I wouldn't give up this place for the world. The changes in society and in the market caused me to worry about the future of my business. But when I met Ara and Ralph, I saw a new opportunity.
Alles goed? Ja, zeker. Een goede reis gehad.
And now I'm glad to have decided to start producing cultivated meat on my farm.
The concept to have farmers to be able to work with cultivated meat will require support for those who want to get into it. To show them how things can be done. This is how to organize it, these are the resources you need, to create a sort of ready-to-use concept, depending on what is already there and what you will be able to connect to it. And that is what we are trying to bring together.
Growing cultivated meat is actually very simple. It is meat that grows in a bioreactor. I take a tiny sample of tissue from one of my cows. Subsequently, we place this in a liquid media in the reactor. In this reactor, we simulate that the cells are inside the cow, which makes them multiply and grow.
Well, what we see that there's a lot of discussion going on about food transition. And ultimately, it's the farmers who produce our food. And also, those farmers have an interest in it being done in an adequate way, with a quality and tasty product. And it ties in their future and business model, how they create value and make money. So for them, it's a matter of urgency to be committed within this transition.
The concept of producing meat in a different way and growing as a business has opened my eyes. I'll be able to produce more meat annually while keeping fewer cows. And they don't need to be slaughtered.
The farm is a smart location to grow cultivated meat because all you need is already there. Of course, cultivated meat requires animals and cells, both of which can be found there. And you need people who know how to handle them. And there are people working there familiar with following processes and who know how to deal with hygiene. But you also need energy, and they have a place to generate it. And farmers can certainly play a role in feeding the cells, and they can also play a role in recycling and waste management. So why wouldn't we do it in a place like that?
The plans are becoming more tangible. It is great to work with a variety of experts who are helping me to make the farm ready for the future.
Hey.
Hey, goedemorgen.
Hey, jij bent vast Lieneke.
Ja.
Lieneke, the architect, will be designing the new layout for my stable. She made a plan with a process technologist to suit the stable for cultivated meat production.
While designing the renovation of the stable, we mainly look at how to use the equipment area required for the meat production in the most efficient way. The walkways between the different functions are most important here. Hygiene is of the utmost importance. En dat kan je ook heel goed schoonmaken. And additionally, the required technical installations must be placed. And it must all be fitted efficiently in the current stable.
Ja, 5 meter.
5 meter.
There is not one stable specifically suitable for producing cultivated meat. It is the architect's challenge to make a stable suitable for meat production. It is, for instance, easier to have the piping run above your head in one stable, while in a different stable it should be passing below. But there is always a solution. In addition to the design of Farmer Teun, we also made a design for a dairy farm. And currently we are working on a proposal for a pig farm. The equipment and working process are the same for every stable. We look at the available space and create an as optimal as possible design.
The design is so smartly devised, and I thank Lieneke for involving me in the design process.
You enter via the control room, where you can monitor the entire process. And then you proceed to the hygiene lock. The hygiene lock will lead you to the production area. Depending on the production area size and height, an X number of bioreactors are installed, which may also vary in height. Adjacent to the production area, there is a space for the feed of the raw materials, an installation room, and when harvesting meat from the bioreactor, it is brought to the packaging area, which is also refrigerated.
We basically link Teun to the people and technologies that are required to turn this farm into a location where ultimately cultivated meat can be produced.
The renovation went quicker than anticipated, and the cultivated meat process is in fact rather simple. I still supply meat and have been able to expand my sales market.
Mooie ruimte.
We are convinced that the most sustainable meat comes from a farm, because it's cultivated meat with all its benefits and also produced in a local circular chain. That is an opportunity we have to take now. This is the moment to show that at this scale it can offer economic and ecological benefits.
My working day is virtually the same as before. I check how the ladies are doing. I look after the crops required for feeding the cells.
Hé man. Moet je dat stuk nog doen of werk je dan?
Ga je op GPS?
And sitting at the kitchen table, I watch the cells grow. It's time to harvest. It is still very special that I'm now able to supply more meat from fewer animals. Many buyers, like most chefs, are local to my area, and the hamburgers they produce are very tasty. It is nice that the region appreciates you for what you do. I could not have predicted a brighter future some years ago. But look at us now. My cows stay with me for longer. The business is more prosperous than ever. And isn't it amazing that I'm still farming on the same spot as my grandpa William once did? Imagine that.
Fantastic. I think that really brings to life and help embed, what that might look like at a kind of on-farm level. And I'm making the assumption that you would also imagine this technology not only being employed on farms, but also, larger scale, but could it even go smaller scale as well? Could you make it even smaller potentially?
I think so. I don't think that like any food, it will only be large scale or it will only be this or that. I think if this food will ever become successful, the storytelling, the narrative of it, where it comes from, whether it's local or it's mass produced, will be important to the consumer.
Yeah.
I think diversity will bring better tastes, diversity in taste.
Yeah.
We like that. We like choice. We like diversity. And if we prevent this industry of becoming diverse, I think we will not help this industry. We will actually cripple it.
I want to touch a little bit on the cellular agriculture Nederland, the project that you've been involved in. There are certain progressive governments that are actively supporting the development of cellular agriculture. Singapore, there's some great work happening in Israel as well. You tell us a little bit about the exciting news locally to you in the Netherlands and what's been happening.
Well, as I explained, we wrote in on this grant. We actually sent in a proposal that asked for 285 million. We thought that was a good idea. I think it still is a good idea, but somehow they said, go back to the table and we give you 60. So we had to sort of rewrite our proposal. Mm-hmm. And they gave us the question, please highlight research, highlight education, and highlight scale-up. Divided over 2 techniques, which are completely separate, even though we both call them cellular agriculture, because it is agriculture with cells, but precision fermentation and cultivated meat are not the same, even though the outcome, amazing food, is. And we had to come up with a different plan, and I am extremely proud of the group that I'm working with, that we all stuck together. It was not just, oh, now this professor and that scale-up person, they get the 60 million and the rest went away. No, we stayed. We see this as the first kickoff of a lot of work we still need to do as Cellular Agriculture Netherlands. We now also host a huge community. So we started in a group, I think, of 8. Then we became 10. Then we had a steering group of 8 people. We had a board, and we had a sort of hovering around group of, I think, let's say 15. Yeah. But right now we're 38 and we're still growing. And what is, even if we wouldn't have gotten the money, but very diverse specialists in this field working together in a very trusted way, that alone, and that the knowledge that we created already would have been enough. But I must say the 60 million is nice, because we can now get to work. So we will educate children, we will educate students, and we will educate on universities. We will do research in Wageningen University, at Delft, and in Maastricht, but we also will have open calls so that people wanting to work on this from different universities will be able to do so. And of the scale-up facilities, we will make sure that we build or use or provide what is needed for cultivated meat startup and precision startups to actually go from that little idea in the lab to a proof point that they can use to go to investors. And that's open source. So from everywhere in the world, companies can come to the Netherlands to use those facilities. We will have about 8 years to do this. And then I hope we have done a lot for open source research, and also hopefully have been a showcase for other governments to follow.
Yeah. And I'm guessing some of that work will also address or interrogate some of the hurdles as well. And you've touched on a few of them there. Regulatory approval is obviously a big one, getting the permissions and the systems around that to be able to sell this to the public at large. Obviously that is in place in Singapore. What are some of the other hurdles that you see, and perhaps expand a little bit more on the regulatory approval piece?
I've said it out loud, and maybe some people think I shouldn't say it, but I do say it because it's important to say it. Singapore is not a backward country. It is very arrogant if Europe says, yeah, well, Singapore has now approved it, as if Singapore wouldn't know how to approve a thing. The regulations to approve this, even in Europe and even in the UK and also in Singapore, they're very well set up. These people know how to assess this. The way you go about an assessment, whether you go about it proactively or you lean backward and you wait until someone brings you something and you're not very forthcoming and you're not creating a super safe place to be in, that's the whole difference. And I think if you only see how right now in the UK, the fact that it is possible for startups to have conversations with the regulatory union that works with the same regulations still as in Europe. Nothing changed. Just the way they go about it. And you see everybody flocking to them, asking them questions, and that those dossiers will get in there. And the same is going on in New Zealand and Australia. A very forthcoming way of going about perfect regulatory system. And I hope that Europe gets it. Sometimes Europe makes things very complicated, but it's not that the law is wrong. We just need to make a focus. And it's at a certain point, the question will be, what kind of safety are we after? If the solutions for the horrible things coming our way are being pushed back because of other safety things that are so much easier to assess than the long time that they think they need for it, then some politicians will get it and say, hey, come on, guys, let's focus on this. Because what we've seen from Singapore, if you put focus on it, if you say, this is what we want, and go do it and make it happen, they do.
What's the opportunity, do you think, for industry as it stands now and agriculture? You know, should they be scared? You know, I've spoken to businesses that are see this as very much as it's a kind of them and us. It's something that should be treated with some confrontation. How do you see that? Is it a shift or a transition, or just some thoughts on that would be really helpful.
Only this year I was in Utrecht on one of the biggest shows where you can buy a whole chicken farm, and you can buy a slaughterhouse, and you can buy a chicken hatchery there. And I was like a kid in a candy store, because I could imagine that ag tech industry, all of that intelligence, all of that precision being used in this industry.
Yeah.
I think anyone in AgTech not thinking that they can bring something to the table is really selling themselves short.
Yeah.
Because they can. And whether you're in feed right now, cells also need food.
Yeah.
It's not that hard to figure out how your feed can also be, and Nutreco is doing that.
Yeah.
And if you are now great at automating and robotizing something in a hatchery, a lot of the work in cultivated meat needs to be taking all of those lab technicians out of the lab and
Yeah.
putting robots and automation in as soon as possible. A bioreactor works with heat, a hatchery works with heat.
Yeah.
There are so many similarities. If they, and it's not going to happen overnight, but be at the table. Make sure you are aware of your know-how and how you can put that into this industry and how it can be complementary and not something that people think, oh, it's going to be it's a huge industry.
Yeah.
There's room enough for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. On that, I guess one of the big questions is around when, which is of course the $1 million question. In your view, how do you see the next 2, 5, 10 years? What does that kind of journey look like for cellular agriculture and cellular meats? And the really pointed question is, when do you think we'll be eating cellular cell ag based meat at home and in restaurants and that kind of thing in Europe and perhaps in other countries? You might feel we'll see it earlier than that. I just welcome your thoughts on that.
Behind me is the bill that I got from a restaurant in Singapore 2 weeks ago, where I had dinner in an amazing restaurant. I was allowed to bring my friends there. And so that's doable tomorrow. If you fly to Singapore, don't do it. It's not good for the environment, but you could fly to Singapore and have dinner there. The reality in Europe is simple. No company has sent in a dossier, and we assume that a dossier sent in Europe will take at least 3 years to be assessed. So there we go. For the next 3 years in Europe, hopefully tastings, nothing in a restaurant or a high-end store yet.
Yeah.
So that also means that in Europe, it is hard for the companies right now to work on scaling up.
Yeah.
Even though we have amazing companies all over Europe, we even have a European Trade Association. But they're very confident. They're now also working in Singapore. The most successful ones are just all flocking to Singapore, getting their pre-approvals and then trying to get the approvals, because there they can go to market.
Yeah.
I have been very surprised about Asia Pacific, how they're working together on the regulatory spectrum. I am very impressed on how those regulatory people are also making sure that smaller countries that don't have these excessive regulatory people in place are now working together so that this can go global.
Yeah.
In the US, they have certain struggles done already.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it's this bureau or that bureau doing the assessment, they figured that one out, and I'm not too worried about that. And then of course the UK, they're egging on Europe, and I hated Brexit, but this is the only fun part about it. But okay, I know you want to know when it is going to be in the supermarket, and to be quite honest, I have no idea, Charles.
Yeah.
If anybody wants me to name a number, it's going to be in restaurants next year's on several places. Dossiers will be sent in next year. I hope the European Union will start to understand that it would be really a shame if their assessment, being paid by European taxpayers' money, will only be used for imported cultivated meat and not exported cultivated meat.
Perhaps within the UK and Europe within the next 5 years, yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. In the UK, definitely. Within the next 5 years, you will be invited to go to dinner somewhere, Charles.
Fantastic, thank you. I mean, we've got 2,500 people listening to this summit, and I'm certain that you'll have sparked attention and thoughts within some of the audience. If they want to get involved, how do they connect and speak to you? And many of the businesses also will have either head offices or indeed satellite operations within the Netherlands as well. So yeah, how do they connect?
Well, become part of the Cellular Agriculture Netherlands community. If you think you have anything to the table to bring to the table, if you have questions, we have monthly gatherings, and you're welcome to join if you are in this space. As long as you understand, go to the website Cellular Agriculture Netherlands, because you can read our plans, you can read our vision, and if you are curious and in agreement with it and want to participate, be there. If you want to be on stage, you have something amazing to tell. If you want me to highlight what you can do, or you want to learn more, then be part of KindEarth.Tech.
Yeah.
And if you are a plant-based company or you are a cultivated meat company, get your logos onto our maps and show the world how this is a huge industry and growing at a rapid pace. If you have questions or doubts about anything I've just said, I'm on LinkedIn. Ask me a question. I love to, and there's not a stupid question.
Yeah.
I get questions like, but in that bioreactor, can anything weird grow in there?
Yeah.
And then I will tell them, no, it can't. Within minutes of starting to grow, you will know there's something wrong there. You will see that it is completely transparent. No growth process is ever as transparent as this. And then this cell crop will just fail.
Yeah.
It will not grow.
Yeah.
Will there be pathogens in there? Can you get sick of this meat? No, you can't, because the pathogens will prevent the cells from growing. Why don't we use antibiotics? Well, we don't use antibiotics in it because antibiotics is contra growth. So it's not a smart thing to do. Why do I say that it could be organic? Because you can use crops without, and all of these questions, please ask them. And I will send you to places where people can give you the smartest and best answers if I can't give them.
It's with regret that we're out of time. I feel like I've got lots more we could talk about, but Ira, a huge thank you from Team TFP and the entire 2022 Summit audience for sharing your learnings, your experiences, your background, the latest developments on cultivated meat and the recent advancements, and a bit about the future horizon. And thanks, Ira, for joining us. It's a really, really thought-provoking discussion. Thank you very much.
Charles, I'm gonna upset your last words a little bit, because there's one thing I've forgotten to mention.
Yeah, that's right.
And you're the food people, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
And food is only something that you eat when it's nutritious and it tastes well. The most amazing thing about cultivated meat is it is a meat cell, and that has a completely different way of searing, cooking, baking than a plant-based cell. And I've had it last week and I was amazed by the taste. So let's not forget that with all the climate stuff, which is good, and all the fact that it's good for the animals, it is also very, very tasty, real meat. And chefs in the audience, they will love to get their hands on it. And I would love to explain also to them how the umami of cultivated meat is so pure, so nice, and so really what everybody expects of meat.
Well, I think that's a great way to wrap up, I think, because ultimately it is about delicious, nutritious food. We've got to enjoy it. Yes. And first and foremost, so if it can deliver that, then I'm sure that will be a great, huge tick in the box, not only for consumers, but also for industry as well. So thanks for sharing that.
Thank you very much, Charles.
All right. My pleasure. Thanks, Ira.